Well, hello everybody. I'm really happy to be here at FOSS Backstage. It's an event that I followed online, remotely, in the past, and it's a really great pleasure to be here in person. So, quick self-intro. This is myself. I'm fortunate to be working at Mastodon right now, but it's important to explain that this talk and this title was submitted for FOSS Backstage with our friends from the Digital Public Goods Alliance. Unfortunately, Leah Gimple, who was my co-submitter, was not able to be here, so you get me flying solo. I will try to represent their content, but please don't expect me to be the absolute expert on all things DPGs. And I also do a bunch of open source things. I've been working for nearly 30 years, as I've heard other people today speak about this on stage, and probably made my first commit in the late 90s as well to an open source project. And I had at the time a colleague at IBM where I worked who was a distinguished engineer, and he described himself at that time as a technology optimist. It's important to distinguish that between that and the techno-optimist manifesto nonsense that came out sometime last year. I do try to be an optimist, though. I'm in technology to work with other people to build cool stuff and make life better for humans. I studied history as my university degree, so and I'm self-taught in tech, so I really care about the people and society elements that we work on. And I'm going to start off with a short historical diversion for you. A bit of a rewind in history. In the 3rd century BCE, the Great Library at Alexandria was built. And it wasn't the only library at the time, but it was a really large collection of knowledge. And the rulers of Alexandria at the time wanted to hoard and control that knowledge. Some ancient writers claimed that as ships came into the dock, if they were searched for scrolls, and if any were found, they were taken to the library, and copies were sent back to the ship. And I think of this in the context of what's going on today with large language models sometimes, and the behavior of AI companies. Consider the concentration of knowledge in data and digital compute power primarily, but not exclusively, on the west coast of the USA. And of course, you might even think of the people that were going to crawl the decks to find those scrolls and desperately saying, please don't come on our ship, we want to leave, in the context of LLMs and AI as well. But libraries spread from there. I contend that libraries and sources of knowledge are good for humanity. My wife has a degree, one of her many degrees, is in library science, and I have a ton of respect for folks who work to make knowledge more accessible for everyone. You're all sitting there thinking, I came to a talk about digital public goods, what is he on about? Well, let's fast forward a couple of thousand years, few revolutions of technology, and of course there was a load of information, and some clever people figured out how to make it a bit more accessible. And back in the early 2000s, my nieces were 5 or 6 years old, and I couldn't remember something, so they said, Uncle Andrew, ask Google, because Google knows everything, which triggered my geek brain to then want to explain how the internet worked to a 5-year-old, which didn't turn out so well. But the point of this historical diversion at the beginning is to say that I love the web, I love the internet. I think it's one of the greatest things that mankind has ever created. And we sit here, people are watching this online, we communicate daily in real time with people on the other side of the planet. This is incredible. And I just want us all to stop for a moment and appreciate that we humans, together collaboratively, created this. We are amazing. You are amazing. And spoiler alert, this talk is about humans. So we need to do some definitions. And digital sovereignty has been mentioned a few times. Does anybody have a clicker for how many times the words have been used this morning already? So I'm not going to go into tons of detail on defining digital sovereignty. But of course, we know that since the start of the current American administration, This notion has been a bit of a buzz term, particularly here in Europe, but elsewhere as well. And of course, if you've been paying attention, it's been ongoing since well before the beginning of last year. The obvious examples being the GDPR, to enable the European citizens to have greater control of their data, the DMA, Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act. We'll come back to some of the regulatory frameworks in a moment, but I put some other words on the slide as well, because whilst there are definitions and organizations that define the term digital sovereignty, the word sovereignty can sometimes be a little bit isolationist. Now, I'm a gentleman who's come here from an island just off the west coast of France, so I may not be the best person to be commenting on this, but I think we really should think about giving ourselves the agency and autonomy to make better choices when we think about digital sovereignty. We don't want to cut ourselves off and be islands. So that's digital sovereignty. I've only heard the term digital public goods mentioned a couple of times so far today, both in conversation and in talks. Digital public goods, the DPG Alliance defines it as a software, data, AI model, standards, or content that adheres to the open definition, that do no harm, and that help attain the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Sounds good. We build open source software. All of our stuff's that, right? We don't want to do harm. There's a certification process to go through here. And having gone through that process to confirm that your software, your product, conforms to those standards, privacy requirements, and other global standards, then you can land in the DPG Alliance's registry. The registry at the moment has more than 220 digital public goods. We've heard the names of some of them on stage this morning. We'll have some more mentioned in some other talks this afternoon. And around 50 of those actually joined the registry last year, which I think is really exciting, and also a good demonstration of the momentum in this space. Now, I said we'd come back to the regulatory framework. I imagine that most people at this event will have paid more attention than many to some of the legislation and other things that have been going on. But quite often I found, especially in the UK, to be honest, if I go to an event and talk about EU legislation or regulatory frameworks, not so much attention is being paid, which is a bit frustrating. But as we know, there's been a significant shift towards unlocking these cages that the big tech platforms have built around themselves, or the moats, as the VCs like to call them. So we've had the GDPR, the DMA, the DSA, the Interoperable Europe Act, which is not one that gets quite so much attention. There was a post last week with one of the European agencies having sent out a Word document for some kind of comment, and one of the free software organizations saying, excuse me, you should be using OpenDoc format instead. So the Interoperable Europe Act mandates that public services across the EU must be interoperable by default. So the government's agencies should be legally nudged towards choosing open standards. And it fits within that public money, public code philosophy. While we're mentioning money, if we're going to identify and support digital public goods, then we need to be building sustainable ecosystems around them. I'll come on to this in the context of Mastodon later on. In Europe, of course, we've got helpful programs like NGI and NLNet. In Germany, the Sovereign Tech Agency we've heard from today as well. But we really need to think about not just building the software, but then maintaining it and supporting and sustaining the communities around them as well. Crucially, the DPG Alliance is not just about building a catalogue of things to enable the EU to compete with the US. In fact, not at all. It's a UN-backed program. And it's also not just about big tech. The African Union has a digital transformation strategy for 2020 to 2030, which also has clear goals to safeguard Africa's data sovereignty in particular. If we look at the value of DPGs, we can see that they provide a number of benefits. That word sovereignty again, cost effectiveness, which is always an interesting one when it comes to talking about open source and whether it's really cheaper and so on. But one of the things I want to, or two of the things I really want to call out on this chart are the notion of transparency of the code, leading to greater ability to audit what you're running, safety and security. And then also that customization and inclusivity, because with open source software, of course, we potentially have the capability to deeply customize it. And that can enable solutions to be tailored to groups that are traditionally excluded from digital experiences. Additionally, we can share lessons between deploying software in different places to enable those underrepresented and marginalized groups to be better supported. The country's digital public infrastructure can be more inclusive. I was at an event a few weekends ago in Wales, where they have an app for a Mastodon server which is specifically targeting people in Wales, and their app by default out of the box presents Welsh and English, for example, as language choices. So I've just hinted at the gear change. We've talked about the policy elements, we've talked about digital public goods. Let's talk about a practical example of a DPG. I mentioned in 2025 there were around 50 new digital public goods added to the registry. In June, Mastodon was one of those, and we're incredibly proud of that. And you may think, well, anybody can download Mastodon. What's the big deal? Why is this a thing? Well, it's because it enables us to say, first of all, someone has independently looked at our project and our software and certified it as qualifying for the digital public good definition, but also it enables organizations to invest in and make use of that software with more confidence. Does anyone in the room not know what Mastodon is? I will just briefly mention it because, of course, the talk will be online and as well. I was really, of course, delighted to see a Fedi wall as I walked in the entrance of the event this morning. It's free and open source software for running social networks. My preference is not to refer to it as social media. This is a very much a personal thing. I feel like social media, it becomes a very consumer-focused thing. It's what you consume, like television or something like that. What I prefer to think of it of is social networks, because we want to connect to people, actual humans, and comment and discuss. So Mastodon's federated. That means that anybody can run a server, connect to those on others, and connect more broadly than that as well, which we'll talk about. We also have the cutest mascot, just putting that out there. Right. So we're at a transition to a new phase. We're going from being this hacker project that Eugene Rochko created to something much more than that. We are relatively small in terms of social networks and software that's out there, but we think it's really important to think about how we grow and sustain the platform. And we spent a couple of years growing an engineering team, some of whom are here in Berlin, which is really nice. I should be meeting them this evening. And adding other roles, including mine. I'm currently head of communications, that are important in managing these non-technical elements of the project. And in case you missed the news, at the beginning of last year, we posted a blog post about our intention to change the organization. Around the end of last year, we actually made some changes to the leadership team. So we now have an executive director, technical director, and community director who are leading the project. And we strongly believe that this is too important to be owned by a single person or a corporation. This is why we are very firmly non-commercial. We don't want advertising, all of those unhealthy things that can lead to much more problematic technology, which we'll also mention in a moment. So as part of that transition, and as part of actually building out this team, once we suddenly had a bunch of people in a shared space together, we wanted to talk really about what our mission and our vision were. So we talked about this as well at FOSDEM earlier in the year. And I think our mission really fits well into this DPG story. It's about connecting the world and enabling thriving online communities. And it really fits well with that digital public infrastructure idea. And I said humans are what this talk is all about. From my perspective, it absolutely is. And I want to be clear that Mastodon is a project built by humans for humans. We care about the people that use the platform. We're incredibly grateful to everybody who participates. And we care about the communities that form around them. And our new community director, Hannah, spoke about this at FOSDEM in terms of opening up to a greater community elements in our governance in the future as well. We want to build a social web that really serves the common good and that is inclusive and welcoming to everyone. But Mastodon is not the Fediverse. Mastodon is part of a broader ecosystem. And again, we've heard this today already from other speakers. We're not trying to be an island. We recognize that we are part of a wider ecosystem. What is the Fediverse? For those that are not aware, it's a set of platforms and software that interoperate using shared protocols. W3 standard called ActivityPub is the key one there. And incidentally, another DPG that was added to the registry last year is PeerTube, which is developed primarily out of France, a federated video hosting platform that interoperates with Mastodon and other Fediverse platforms. I think Mastodon is an excellent example to use when we talk about how DPGs can support digital sovereignty. And we've already done a bit of time travel in this talk. This is a bit more recent. Back in 2024, I wrote this blog post. My previous job to the one I'm in today, for those of you that don't know me, is I work for a company that no longer exists called Twitter. And it was a nice place. In 2022, it was bought by the world's richest 12-year-old. He changed its name and invited the worst humans to set up the home there, and then started himself attacking politicians and public servants around the world. But in particular, there was a moment in time where he was doing that to some British politicians, female ones. Gosh, wouldn't have seen that coming. And it led me to write this blog post because I recognized at the time that suddenly having all of these governments on a platform that they absolutely had no control of was a bit challenging. So I really believe that if you're a government agency, civic agency, publisher, you really should be owning the platform that you're publishing on. Otherwise, when they fall into the hands of bad actors, you find yourself in an impossible position. Why be at the mercy of a platform that can weaponize its own algorithm against you? So we've really moved away from this idea of a global town square, a single global town square, a single global platform, to a more federated and decentralized model that allows a government or a small community to run your own services, own your own data, but remain connected, crucially, to the world and to anybody that wants to be connected with you. DPGs can dilute that platform risk. If one node fails or the rules change, it doesn't mean that the whole network collapses. Mastodon at the moment is pretty strong around some elements of customization. You'll see some more coming in the future, but it really is, as I mentioned with the example in Wales, and there's another one in Canada, in Quebec. It really does enable you to customize and support your national, regional, local community. So in terms of sustainability and what we're doing at Mastodon, one of the things that we are doing is we've started to offer some hosting. And we're helping organizations to start their own servers if they want to. So specifically the EU Commission, the state of Schleswig-Holstein here in Germany, Blois, the city in France, as well as others. If they want a quick way to get started, then we can help them ourselves. But really importantly, whilst we do host those, we want other organizations to also run their own, because just one organization hosting a bunch of Mastodon servers in one set of data centers is not very resilient. So it would be great if other organizations can run their own as well, and we'll provide some support services to those if they want to. So why would those public institutions move to Mastodon and the Fediverse? Well, it's about that direct connection. It's about avoiding the algorithm disintermediating their posts. It's about avoiding the commercial middleman harvesting citizens' data. And to some extent, there's this public money, public code element. But we still see that that needs to go further. And as I mentioned, that example last week or 2 weeks ago, where not all of the organizations immediately choose the open and interoperable options. I'm not the only person writing about this, and just this is right up to date. This was the thing I was frantically adding to my slides this morning because my friend Eleanor Rossini, one of her Mastodon or one of her Fediverse addresses is here, posted just this morning. I got an email from her Ghost newsletter on a similar topic. It's a longer read. It's more up to date than the blog post that I wrote a couple of years ago. And Eleanor is just such an incredible person to follow. She's non-technical. She's actually a filmmaker, but she's really passionate about promoting the use of open source and also the Fediverse. Total coincidence that went live this morning, but it was really exciting to see that. So something I regret to inform you, while I talk about how exciting Mastodon is and how we've reorganized and we've got this bigger engineering team and we've got new things happening, we have not completely cracked sustainable funding. And I'm sure many of you in the room who work on open source projects have not completely dissimilar challenges. Whilst we receive a lot of interest from public institutions, it doesn't mean everybody is wanting us to host them or that they are themselves donating to open source projects like ours or the ones that we depend on. We are very, very grateful for the grants that we have received. We've received a number from NGI programs to date and others. Our ambition would be that we are much more strongly supported by user donations. We have a very clear notion that we do not want any kind of individual influence based on outsized donations. And clearly, we want to think about how to fund our project and our team without going to some of those more problematic routes. Advertising is off the table, for example, and that's fine. But we need to think about the broader funding of the program. And it's not just about funding a bunch of people to write the software and build pretty user interfaces and add features. It is also about things like sending me here. I'm later in the week going over to Brussels to have some more conversations there as well. And as we know, we're at FOSS Backstage. There are a lot of these less visible elements to either the user community or the developer community to what we do together to make our project successful. I'm really excited mentioning the fact that we've expanded the team. I don't know how many of you are staying for Wednesday, FOSS Backstage Design, but our designer, our UX lead, Imani, is going to be speaking. And I've had a sneak peek at her script, and it looks really, really great. I'm going to miss it because I'll be on a flight to Brussels at the time. But you'll learn a lot about the importance there and the the ways in which we're thinking about professional grade user experience now, it really is a step change in the way that Mastodon is being developed. All right, this is where we're going to wrap, though. I want to talk about, very briefly, just sort of flip through these things. When we're talking about digital public goods, we need to be thinking about that interoperability. We need to actually be talking with the Digital Public Goods Alliance. I mean, I'm not here myself as them, but I'm really proud to collaborate with them and also to work with other projects in the portfolio that they have in the registry. So we need to think about how we're going to continue to fund DPGs. There isn't a single answer to that. And ensure that our governments think about interoperability. And that is my talk today. Thank you.
Thanks for that talk. How do you convince public institutions to use the Fediverse rather than big tech, where the argument from the sort of bigwigs at the top is that the public is on YouTube, the public is on Facebook, they're on X. Like, why would they publish to the Fediverse rather than where the public already is? How do you convince people?
Great question. So essentially, I see an audience over there. Why should I come over here? People are already over there. First of all, I would say that if you are specifically, and this is me bashing X, but if you're specifically thinking you have an audience on X, then the numbers that you see are fictional. Most of those are almost certainly bots and not real people. That is my X bashing done. It's a great question. There's a gentleman called Ralph Stockman who's here in Berlin, works for the libraries here, who's come up with this +1 concept. So if you're going to be posting on these proprietary commercial platforms and you're a public institution funded by public money, then you should be using one of those platforms. So that's the public money, public code argument. Eleanor's blog post that I showed a screenshot of there has also got a bunch of stuff around the topics you just raised around where your audience is and where you think your audience is. Our experience and my experience with Mastodon or the Fediverse is that actually I get a lot more engagement on those platforms than I do elsewhere, because there is so much noise on other platforms compared to Signal. There is also an element of, yes, if you build it, they will come, but if you don't come, then you won't see the people also coming to participate. I was at Twitter for a long time, and this is an absolutely obvious, counterpoint to everybody should be on the Fediverse. We don't have metrics. We are, private by. We take user privacy more seriously than other platforms do. Therefore, we're not tracking who's clicking. We're not giving you all the information and all the nice, pretty charts about how engaged you think your audience is. So it is a hard sell. In Mastodon, we've done a few things recently, for example, with posting links now. Depending on how your server is configured, people can start to see traffic from Mastodon servers coming back to news articles and so on. So that can help a little bit. But it's a hard sell, and it's a frustrating sell, because in a time of money not being as cheap as it was, people are optimizing for what they think is the cheapest way to get the biggest audience, rather than necessarily living up to their own values of wanting to engage with those audiences. One of the interesting things I find with working with some of the organizations that push for more participatory democracy is that they take this very seriously. But a lot of governments sadly seem to think that it's all a media game, that's a very big element of it, let's be honest. But I think the +1 approach of saying, okay, you're posting on these other things, but you really need to be engaging with this other community who may not be in those places at all, and then see that grow out can be quite powerful. Sorry, that was a long answer.
That's a good answer, thank you.
All right, folks. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. Thank you, Andy.